Hi, my name is Ellen Stacy. I am a student at Texas State University. This past semester, I worked with the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and based on my experiences there, I've developed an intervention that I wanted to share with you all today. So let's talk about the population that the Texas Juvenile Justice Department serves. Um, a lot of the issues that youth in the TJJD face involve adverse childhood experiences. Over 88% of the youth who are committed to the TJJD have experienced at least one, with many of them experiencing more than one adverse childhood experiences. They also experience high rates of domestic violence, stress, generational criminality, substance use disorders, impulsivity, and overall low quality of life. Um, why is this an issue? Well, first and foremost, because they're children. They have a right to be cared for and to have resources like shelter and medical care and food and love from somebody. And a lot of that is falling through the cracks with the youth in the TJGB. Another thing that we have to consider is costs emotionally to the youth and their families, to the communities around them through destruction and having to pay for infrastructure to manage juvenile delinquency. It affects community safety as well, makes it difficult for others to raise their families and to take care of themselves. And it's also a great cost to the Texas state government. The TJG is a state-funded organization, and it gets expensive to commit these youth over and over and over again. We see really high rates of recidivism. Over 75% of youth will recommit a crime and be reincarcerated or revoked on their parole within 3 years of being released. And the cost of housing a youth, an individual youth, for 1 year is $400,000. That only includes the cost of the staff who work with them, paying their salaries, the overhead costs of having utilities and a roof over their heads, food, medical care, all of the resources you put into legal fees. It gets expensive, and with 576 youth currently incarcerated in the state of Texas, it can add up pretty quickly. And like I said, that's just for housing them. So there's a lot of reasons to be considering that, and that's kind of where the Texas model comes into play. In the last 2 years, the Texas model was developed by the TJJD to address criminality at its core and start really tackling these adverse childhood experiences and healing these youth to try and help prevent that. And that's where my intervention comes in. So let's talk about what the organization, the community have going for them and what they might need assistance in. The organization, it's a state-funded facility, like I said, so they constantly have funding being allocated to them in the legislative board meetings every year. They have volunteers coming in. They have a steady stream of staff because they offer those state-funded benefits. They have the Texas model going for them. That's a model that is based off of TBRI strategies. If you're not familiar, TBRI is trust-based relational interventions. It is based on the idea that rather than punishing children, it is more beneficial to nurture them and to set firm boundaries to create structure than it is to be punitive. So a lot of the practices involve making sure that their basic needs are met and building up their trust, finding things in common, and really supporting them and addressing problems in the moment, teaching them to regulate themselves. The community. So the community, they need resources. They need access to food, shelter, medical expenses, clothing. That's where your wraparound services come in handy. ACEs. So a lot of the community experiences adverse childhood experiences, like I said. So this can involve domestic violence, sexual assault, things of that nature. So those have a big trauma impact on our youth and need to be addressed. And the youth need stress management and impulse control, which again is why I am proposing MBSR to be adapted for this population. So my project is to implement a mindfulness walking group with the youth at Ayers Halfway House. The goals of this short term are to alleviate stress and teach coping strategies to youth in everyday life, And the long-term goal is to gather feedback to inform a curriculum that will adapt mindfulness-based stress reduction practices to be more accessible to youth and more sustainable over the long term, both within the secure facilities and once they are released back into the community. The objectives for this are to provide an abbreviated introduction to MBSR through walking meditation and an introduction to the facets of mindfulness, and to collect and analyze data through pre-test, post-test measures, and provide an evaluation survey upon program completion. My timeline for this. So as you can see to the right here, I have a Gantt chart outlining the start and end of my project. I began with conducting a literature review to establish a need within the community. I also spoke with members of the community and staff members of the TJJD. And the theme that was coming up is just we have to figure out how to address the core issues before we can figure out anything else. So criminality at its core, both in adults and juvenile populations, the first step is making sure that everyone has their needs met, and then we go from there. Another thing that I did in my literature review, I have experience with mindfulness and have heard in the past that it has positive effects for stress reduction and emotional awareness and control. So I looked into that with youth populations and saw a need for more research to be done there. My proposal, I had to put this all together before I could even pitch this one and pitch it to the TJJD administration at the Ayers Halfway House to get them to let me run my miniature pilot program study. My method of doing this was through direct implementation. I have a simple single group pre-test, post-test, pre-experimental design in place where I go in and directly provide services. So in this case, the abbreviated MBSR introduction, and then I'm going to evaluate it by doing pre-test and post-test measures. Speaking of, here they are. You will see that all of the items here are identical until you get to the end where there's a difference because the final item asks about willingness to learn more about mindfulness. Then I do my program, and at the end I want to know, will they continue to practice it now that the group is concluded? Evaluation, how am I going to make sure this is working? Well, one is ongoing feedback. I'm going to have an open dialogue with the staff, the youth, with myself through journaling and checking in, and just be aware of how people are perceiving this and what their thoughts are. It's a collaborative effort. I can't just come in there and say, you know what, this is what's best for you. I need to learn from them. So that's a big thing about my project, is just going in as a learner. Survey, I'm conducting my pre-test, post-test measures. Self-evaluation, like I said, having a journal, evaluating my success in implementing the program and the areas I can improve in. Staff feedback, talking to the staff, getting their opinions, what the limitations they see are, and learning experiences. Just instead of basing it off of my success leading the groups, because I'm very inexperienced, I am going to base my success off of what I gain from it, so the feedback I receive. Here is that anonymous feedback measure. I'll remove my screen, my face, so you can see that. And this just gets an idea of how they felt engaging in the practice and what they would like to see more of or less of in the future. Here we've got some results from the evaluation. So some things of interest that are good to know for the future are that they don't care who does it. It could be me, it could be another staff member who works with them regularly. They will listen and appreciate the content just the same. Another thing that's interesting is that you see a desire for more education. So they want to see more activities and they want to learn more about mindfulness. So that's good to know so that I can be a little bit more informative. I try to keep it very practical this time around, just to get these responses for future directions, and the kids want to know more. So that's very good to know in curriculum development. Some of the other interesting findings that we had were just learning about the development process. So before I can implement this on a grand scale, I needed to figure out how to do it on this meso scale, or meso to macro scale. And I petitioned for funding to fund pedometers, which didn't end up working, but it was good to learn anyway. I learned about scheduling constraints, so being flexible and collaborating with the staff. Resource constraints, like I said, I received some funding, but it was only so much and the pedometers did not work. That's okay, we went on without it. Safety incident plan. I had an incident that allowed me to consider that as something to include in the curriculum. And um, now that will just be a note to whoever is guiding the program, whoever is implementing it. Just make sure you're speaking with your supervisor, the staff at whatever facility that you're entering into, to have a plan in place in case of boundary crossings or just any kind of not preferable situation. Reminder to always be a learner, so there'll be something in the curriculum regarding that. Like I said earlier, I came in as someone who I know I have a lot of privilege. Just if you look at me, you can tell, especially with the population we're working with, right? Like these kids, like I said, they came from lower SES. A lot of them are minorities. So you gotta be careful when you're coming in there not to just take over and tell them exactly what to do. It's a collaborative effort. I don't know their community like they do. I don't know their needs and their strengths like they do. So that was really important, was coming in very humble and making sure that I created an environment where they felt comfortable sharing. And that's something I'm going to include in the curriculum in the future. And future directions, I've got some pre-test, post-test results here in a comparison. So some things that stood out, just a continued interest, which of course could be moderated by the fact that they're in a facility where they are encouraged to engage with all their groups. I had a few ask if it was a 225, which is code for a mandatory group so they can go on parole. No, it's not. Everything was voluntary. Even though this is only quasi-experimental, I wanted to make sure to keep it as ethical as possible in line with our school's IRB and with the agency's codes. So I got 7 total complete pre-test, post-test measures, 15 pre-test measures, and 7 feedback responses. And the interesting things here, like I said, a continued interest. It seems like the youth really wanted to learn to begin with and then increased or maintained that desire to learn by the end of the program. Seems like there might have been something to look at in terms of the program possibly resulting in more honesty. There are other things going on. They're in different treatments, so I don't want to presume anything. My data is not inferential, but I did see in the post-test measures that people were starting to kind of step back and say, you know, maybe I'm not so sure how to calm myself down. Maybe I'm not aware of how I'm feeling all the time, and maybe I'm not sharing it with others. So those are all just future directions for when the next phase of this project comes about. And last, of course, I wanted to say a special thank you to the South Region Parole team. I got to work with a lot of different levels of care within the TJJD. I got to work with the parole team, with the family reentry enrichment specialist, community relations, the staff at the halfway house, a lot of mental health providers. They were all extremely flexible and extremely supportive. I would not have been able to go pair with the youth at the Ayers halfway house if it were not for them bending over backwards to make sure I got in there. There are all kinds of constraints like COVID-19 and just the fact that we're all online and distance learning right now, and the fact that they're packed full in their schedules. So it meant a lot to me that they allowed me to come in and run this little pilot program. That's all I've got. Thank you for your time and for your consideration of moving this forward to the next stage.